And with that, I'm going to introduce our beloved Vice Mayor, Kathy Leventhal, who will read our proclamation.
Thank you, Jim. First, I'd like to thank Jonah and Ellen for making this opportunity available to us to have a conversation with the governor. And I do have a proclamation from our mayor, Vic DeLuca, and the Township Committee. Unfortunately, Vic is out of town. Well, fortunately for me, but he's in California, so I guess fortunate for him too. So I'd like to read this for you. Whereas Honorable Governor Thomas Kean served as the 48th governor of the state of New Jersey from 1982 to 1990. Governor Kean proved hugely popular in office, winning re-election in 1985 with the largest margin of victory in the history of New Jersey's gubernatorial races, winning every municipality in the state except 3, although Maplewood was not one of those 3. You were there. He originally was a teacher of history and government and was first elected in 1967 to public service as a Republican to the New Jersey General Assembly, and it doesn't say this, but representing Maplewood. Whereas Governor Kean is best known globally for his 2002 appointment as chairman of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, widely known as the 9/11 Commission, which was responsible for investigating the causes of the September 11, 2001 attacks and providing recommendations to prevent future terrorist attacks. Governor Kean was appointed to this post by the United States President George W. Bush. And whereas upon the completion of his second term as governor, he served as the president of Jew University for 15 years until his retirement in 2005. And whereas Governor Kean has tirelessly devoted his life to working for others as a public servant for the great state of New Jersey and has volunteered his time by appearing at Words, a unique Maplewood bookstore committed to enabling Maplewood to serve as a model community of inclusion through its support of and hospitality to developmentally disabled customers and employees, especially those with autism. Now therefore be it resolved, Victor DeLuca, Mayor of the Township of Maplewood, on behalf of the Township Committee, proclaims Thursday, January 28, 2010, as Governor Thomas Kean Day in the Township of Maplewood, New Jersey.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hold on to that for you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Wow. How much of the day is left? No, I'm delighted to be here. I have a very special place in my heart for Maplewood. I always have had, because as some of my old friends who are here know, I was a very young guy running for the state assembly. And people in Maplewood sort of took me to their heart. I was from Livingston, ways away, and came down here. And people couldn't have been kinder. Every time I run, my old friends, Bob Grasnier used to be mayor here, and the McNanny family, every one of whom was great. They're still here in Maplewood, and so many others. And I did well in Maplewood that first year, and did well every time I ran. And no matter what I ran for, whether it was the assembly or whether it was for governor, always did very well in Maplewood. You all were very, very good to me, and I always remembered that. And what I do tell them is very serious. Very often, you know, I get calls from friends, and because of the job shifts or whatever, they want to come to New Jersey. And they'll call and say, you know, we work in New York, we want to move out to New Jersey, and where do you think we ought to look for a place to live? And there's one town I always mention, Maplewood. And for some reason I want to live here, I sometimes say Montclair. But always Maplewood number one. Always Maplewood number one. And you've always been a great town forever. I don't know what, I was trying to think, there's so many things going on in this world, and what we want to talk about. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here in New Jersey with the new governor and the budget deficit and the cabinet appointments, the legislature and all of that. There's everything going on in the world, the economy, the election in Massachusetts, to President's State of the Nation remarks last night. And but I thought what I'd talk about just for a while, because it's one of the things I do and I learned a lot about, is talk a little bit about the terrorist threat, and maybe talk about some of my work on the 11 Commission, what I think about what's going on today, and what I think about some of the incidents that happened so recently on Christmas Day in this country, and the attack at Fort Hood. I knew nothing about security, or about terrorism, or about the CIA and the FBI and the world of secrets down in Washington at all. I was just like you. And I don't know why, but I was sitting at home minding my own business after that terrible attack on 9/11, where I, like maybe you, lost a number of friends. And the phone rang. Henry Kissinger had been appointed original chairman of the 9/11 Commission. And then he had all sorts of conflicts of interest, it turned out. He thought he was going to have to reveal his client list. And given Kissinger's clients, he said, about to realize I'm out of business. He said, so he had to quit. And I got this call. And it was first from Karl Rove, who I never met, I don't think, at that point, who said, if the president asked you to do this, would you consider it? Because you wanted a number of people under consideration. And having lost a number of people, friends of mine, I said, of course I'd consider it. And then I said to my wife, and I got this call, but don't worry about it. Considering a lot of people, I'm not going to be me. Next day, I got a call from NJ Gov, who was the president's chief of staff. And I didn't know him. I'd known him for years. And he called and said, would you mind pretending that I'm the president of the United States? I said, all right, Andy, if that's what you want. And he said, look, the president is, for the first time in a long, long time, having some time alone with his children. And so he wanted me to ask you, will you say yes, and he'll call you tomorrow? So I said, yes. He said, is that a yes? And I said, well, I guess so. And the next day, I felt like a ton of bricks had fallen on me. Because the commission had been appointed by the most partisan people in the country. The leaders of the legislature, the Congress, Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other, have been asked for the appointments. I was the only one with the presidential appointment. Everybody else was appointed by leaders of Congress. And they were going into one of the most partisan elections in history at the time. So they appointed some partisan people. And I didn't know any of them, except one. I knew a fellow called Jim Thompson, who'd been governor of Illinois when I'd been governor of New Jersey, so we'd become friends as governors do. But he's the only one I knew. And all of a sudden I had this responsibility. We didn't have enough money. The Congress, a number of them really didn't want the commission, and had been forced to do it really by the work of the families of 9/11, who had really lobbied the Congress so hard because they weren't satisfied with the kind of investigations that had gone on by the United States Congress. So we didn't have the support, we didn't have the money, we had a very partisan time going into the election, we had a short timeline, and I figured, this thing's been set up to fail. And I went down to see Lee Hamilton. Lee Hamilton had been, luckily for me, appointed the vice chairman. It had been George Mitchell, who had been the Democratic leader in the Senate, and then he had a conflict of interest, same as Kissinger, and he had to get out. So as Lee said to me, we're second-hand picks. And so I went down and introduced myself to Lee in his office in Washington, and said to him, look, there's got to be bipartisan. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to make any decisions as chairman unless you agree with them. No appointments, no decisions, nothing, unless you and I get along. And interestingly enough, for the whole rest of the commission, we got along so well, and the rest of the commissioners thought we'd made some secret pact to always agree. But we hadn't. We just happened to agree on a number of things. He's a wonderful man, Lee Hamilton. He's been chairman of the committee in Congress for a number of years, now out of the Wilson Center. And just one of these people in public life who is only there for the right reasons. No side agendas. If it's right, he's for it. If it's not right, he's not. And so he was a delight to work with. And we got along so well, and the rest of the commission, some of them started off, some of the Republicans, some of the Democrats started off, looking at each other like this. When I walked in, the Republicans sitting in one corner, Democrats in the other corner, talking to each other and sort of looking as Republicans and Democrats from Washington do. These other strange people on the other side of the room. And the first thing I said was, the first thing you're going to do is move your seats. And I said, what? These were very distinguished people, former United States senators, former governors, people who've been Deputy Attorney General, very distinguished people, some of the White House counsel. And I was telling them, I'm not going to sit where you think you're sitting. I said, if the rest of this exercise, the rest of this commission, I don't want to see any of you sitting next to, any Democrat sitting next to a Democrat. I don't want to see any Republican sitting next to a Republican. You'll move your seats, and we're going to sit the way we're going to operate in a bipartisan manner. And they told me later, they thought this was some crazy school teacher who'd been foisted on me, which is what I used to be. But they did it. And then because I was a new guy in town, everybody wanted me on television. You know, because 9/11 commission was a big deal. And all these other people in Washington, people had seen before, but I was a new guy, so everybody wanted me on television. And I told everybody from Today to every show there was, I'm not coming on unless you invite Lee Hamilton on with me. We're going to do this together. And they said, I remember Meet the Press said, we don't operate that way. And I said, fine, then get another guest. And they said, okay. That lasted for about 12 hours. And they called and said, will you and Lee come on? And I said, yes. But all through the rest of the work of the commission, we not only went together to everything. I mean, any invitation I got, he took me. I took him. Any invitation I got, I took him. Or he took me. Whatever. But we always went together. And then we told the rest of the commissioners, why don't you follow suit? You know, because the other commissioners were getting a lot of invitations, radio and television too. I said, look, why don't you pick somebody on the other party and do it together? And they sort of agreed to do that. So all of us went like Noah's Ark, you know, 2 by 2, except Republicans and Democrats. And I tell all this because I was at a hearing testifying on, actually, the subject of terrorism yesterday in Washington. And one of the senators interrupted the hearing and said, you know, we're talking, the president wants to commission now to look at the budget, Republicans and Democrats, to try and make the kind of recommendations that maybe Congress can't handle and a nonpartisan commission might do, and how do these commissions work? I didn't have time to tell him the kind of stories I've just told you, but they work because you give up the credit to somebody else. They work because you give the other party as much power as you have. They work because everybody treats each other as equals. They work because you got to dinner at night and become friends. They work because I talked one of the Democratic commissioners having us all to her house, so we met her family. I talked to one of the Republican commissioners to have us to his house, we met all his family. And when you get to know each other like that, you can't be like this. You know, when you get to know each other as human beings, you recognize no matter if it's an R or a D in front of the name, they're there the same reason you are, you know, to try and do something for the public. But that was what you have to do to make these commissions work. And the only time Lee and I ever disagreed, we had one disagreement. And I went one way and he went the other way, but it was the way nobody expected us to go. The FAA had actually lied. Had actually lied to the commission. And our staff members, one of our best staff members, who was John Farmer, who used to be Attorney General of New Jersey, who had appointed a member of the staff, figured it out and found out information that they weren't giving us, found out that they hadn't told us the truth. And so he came, and they'd actually withheld information from us. And he came to me and said, you know, I want subpoenas. We didn't issue many subpoenas because we thought there was better ways of doing it. But he said, in this case, I want a subpoena because I want to show them we mean business and want every bit of information they have, and I want to send a signal to everybody else. Lee had lunch with Don Rumsfeld, who was chairman of the, or rather, Secretary of Defense. And Rumsfeld had told Lee, I'm very embarrassed about this whole thing, and I feel very sorry. You'll have every bit of information you need tomorrow. And Lee said, with Rumsfeld giving us that assurance, and he'd known Rumsfeld for years, because they're both Washingtonians, so he said, I just can't vote for a subpoena. And I said, well, I think the staff ought to be supported. I am going to vote for a subpoena. And so I voted with the Democrats, he voted with the Republicans, and they got a subpoena. That's the only time we ever disagreed. But anyway, what we found, as you may remember, is that the United States government had failed on almost every level to protect us. That they had made mistakes, errors of judgment. Almost every department we dealt with in one way or another. And we figured finally, as far as the intelligence agencies went, the biggest failure they had was that they didn't share information with each other. You know, if you're brought up perhaps to hold secrets, and these people are brought up to hold secrets, then they held them from each other. We think of the FBI and the CIA, there are 17 different intelligence agencies, and they were all silos, and they didn't talk. So for instance, there were two of the hijackers who were involved in one way or another in the bombing of the Cole, remember that?
Yeah.
And we had their names, the CIA did. And so they came and they followed them. There was a meeting of bad guys in Kuala Lumpur. And the CIA was there sort of tracking these guys. And Hazmi and Mittal were the two names. And they went to Bangkok, and somehow in Bangkok they shook the tail, and they shook the pin and disappeared. And nobody knew where they went. They went to Los Angeles. And they came into this country using their own names. And they got driver's licenses in their own names. And they got credit cards in their own names. And this was on the international terrorist list of the CIA, who never told the FBI. Never shared that information with the FBI. So the FBI, which could have acted, would have arrested them as terrorists and perhaps exposed the plot, never got that information at all. Just didn't share with each other. It wasn't a culture for us to share with each other. I'll give you one more example. Remember the name Moussaoui? Moussaoui, we think, was the next terrorist. There was one of the terrorists who had fallen in love. And he had a girlfriend back in Arabia. And at one point he just took off and went back to see her. Well, the leader of the hijackers thought this guy's not reliable. And he was particularly important because he was one of the pilots. The pilots were key to the whole thing. And he had gone home to see the girlfriend. And they thought, well, you know, anybody who's in love, he's liable to leave any minute and go back to his girlfriend. And so they were sort of trying to train somebody to take his place in case he left. And that we think was Moussaoui. Well, he had to learn to fly a plane. So he went to learn how to fly a plane. And they said, what did he want? He said, I want to learn how to fly a jumbo jet. Now, most people don't come to flying school to learn how to fly a jumbo jet. They usually start with something a little bit smaller. And so this roused suspicions, and sure enough, it got to the FBI, who tracked him down and said he was registered as a possible terrorist. So they arrested him. Now, they couldn't get into his computer because nobody would give them, the judge wouldn't give them the right to get into his computer. So, but they just held it. He was held. And it went up. Somehow, it got not to the head of the FBI. It never got to the head of the FBI. It got stuck somewhere in the chain, but the head of the CIA found out about it. And he knew that there was a terrorist who was trying to learn to fly a jumbo jet. And we asked him when he came to the hearing, we said, if you knew a terrorist was going to fly a jumbo jet, why didn't you do something? And he said, it wasn't our case, it was the FBI's case. That was the relationship the two agencies had. And I tell you these stories, I could tell you a lot of other stories, I'll tell you these stories to lead into what's going on now. Because when we finished our report, one of our main recommendations was, you cannot have these silos anymore. All these people get all these bits of information, and they've got to share them with each other to make the puzzle complete, to connect the dots, or whatever you want to say. So, we said, no more. You're going to have this crazy system where there's no head of intelligence, when nobody's in charge of this stuff. Nominally, the CIA director was in charge, but nobody paid any attention to that. Because the CIA director ran the CIA, and it was a full-time job. So we said, no, there's going to be two things going on. One is there's going to be what we call now the DNI. Everything's got initials in Washington. DNI is the Director of National Intelligence. And his job is to coordinate all these agencies, and if necessary, force them to share information. And right under him is a counterterrorism center that meets now in Washington every day. And there are representatives of every one of these 17 intelligence agencies sitting around a round table saying what they have today, sharing information, and so on. And we put that in place. We recommended it, and Congress passed the legislation. It wasn't easy, but they passed it, and put in place the largest reform of the intelligence community in the nation's history. And so we said, great, that's going to force the sharing of information. Well, what's happened? Some of it's just not followed up. I mean, for instance, the guy at the shooter at Fort Hood. Remember, he was connected to a cleric he was talking to on the phone? That cleric, if you have a copy of the 9/11 Commission report, he's mentioned. He had a connection to the hijackers, and we said we had not got the staff or the time, but this is basically, we said, this is a bad guy, and people have got to follow him up. We've got to do the work. So 5 years later, nobody followed him up. And here he is now being the inspiration for this terrorism. It's in that report, it's in the book, his name. And nobody followed him up. And secondly, as far as the Obama, oh, not Obama, the guy who tried to set the, yeah, that was Obama, tried to set up, yeah. Oh, wouldn't you like to be known in history as the underpants bomber? There were a lot of pieces of information, a lot of people out there, a lot of pieces of information out there. First of all, as you all remember, his father walked into the embassy and said, you know, my son is been radicalized. I think he's going to Yemen. He's in real trouble, and I want you to check on him because we all still love him, but he's with the bad guys. That was sort of put in a file. It sort of started wending its way up. In the meantime, we had a bit of information that there was a terrorist, when we had the first name, who was being trained over there. And then we had a couple of other pieces of information. There were a couple of things went wrong. You know, on your computer, if you misspell something, you know, it corrects it for you. Federal computers don't do that. Somebody misspelled the name by one letter, so it never got in rightly into the base. And secondly, nobody put these pieces of information together. Now, I've interviewed all the people now who are running intelligence in Washington. We had the President's National Security Advisor talking to us yesterday. Okay, and what he said is, no, they're not deliberately not sharing. There's just an error. And the result is the same, I said. You know, they had all these pieces of information, they just didn't think they were important enough to bring forward. Now, the President himself has said that was a terrible error. And they've admitted that this was something that never should have happened. And we were very, very, very fortunate. Because that guy had the kind of explosives that could have brought down that plane. They set the side of the plane on fire, as you remember, and passengers hadn't jumped on him, put out the fire and all of that. And in the end, all he did really was hit himself. But it could have killed a lot of innocent people, and that's what he was planning to do. Now, we've learned a lot. We didn't know, evidently, that although we warned about Yemen 5 years ago, they said they weren't aware, they were aware there were bad guys in Yemen. But they weren't aware of the fact that these people had the capability to start sending people at the United States. So that was something they were totally unaware of. They didn't conceive of that possibility. They thought that might come in the future, but it was years away. Secondly, the technology was flawed. Third, the human intelligence was flawed. But what's happened is that this guy, in some ways, has done us a real favor. Because, frankly, our government was asleep at the switch. It's not, and it's understandable in a way, because you know, we as a people have a very short attention span. You know, in this administration, we've been all tied up in healthcare, and tied up in global warming, and tied up in the problems of the economy, and all the rest of it. And they just, I think, had let their eye off the ball as far as this whole counterterrorism effort. Not that there weren't some good people there are. And I don't have any problem with the Obama appointees. I think they're pretty good. But they're just, from the top down, they're just taking the eye off the ball. And now the eye's back in the ball. And I believe that they're making the kind of corrections. Now it's a very difficult job. Think of this. There are as many as 500,000 bits of information that can come in a single day. More information can come in a week than is contained in the entire Library of Congress. So it's a huge job trying to put these things together. But we should have the very best technology and the very best people. We need the best analysts. That's one thing I pointed out to them the other day. You know, that for years in the intelligence services, the agents were the people, you know, they were the people you read about in the books you read, and novels on this area. The agents are the exciting ones. And the people who were not given the same kind of recognition, promotion, and everything else were the analysts. Now, the agents can't act without the analysts. Because the analysts are the ones who take all these bits of information, put them together, and give them to the agents. So if you don't have the information from the analysts, it was a failure of analysis that caused this last problem. So you've got to have really good people doing that analysis. And they've got to be recognized for what they do, and they've got to be promoted, and they've got to be recognized, and we've got to say, great, you know, it's wonderful to have you working with us, so we don't lose them. And I think now the administration is moving in that direction. But that whole world is a strange world, a world of secrets. I'll tell you this one story about when I started the commission. All the other people in the commission had intelligence experience. 3 of them had been for years on the intelligence committees in Congress, House, and Senate. Another had been the Attorney General's office. They'd all had one from the President's They all had security clearances. They all dealt in this world before I had hands. I was brand new. And I remember when I got my brand new minted top secret clearance. So you know, it's a very seductive world, the world of secrets. You know, and all of a sudden I had this thing which enabled me to look at things you can't see. Nobody else. I could now look at that stuff. And they brought me in this black-covered FBI report about this large. And it was everything they really knew about the 9/11 hijackers at that point. You know, all secret. And I'd seen this book before, but no one allowed me near it until I got my security clearance. And I had it. So I sat down, and they always had an FBI agent with you. So I used to call them our minders, who watched you while you read the secret stuff. So I sat down one thing, about 300 pages long. I sat down in an afternoon, 2.5 hours, read the whole thing. And through. I read it. Afterwards, I looked up at the FBI agent and I said, I knew all this. He looked at me and said, yes, but you didn't know it was true. Most of what I saw during this time having top secret clearance and reading all this information, which is top classified, including the presidential daily briefings, which nobody sees, not even any member of Congress ever sees. I get to look at all those things. I'd say 3/4, literally 3/4 of what I read should have been public. There was absolutely no reason that anybody could have seen it. 25% of it, yeah. 20% of it might have jeopardized an agent or something that's important in foreign relations or something that really shouldn't have been seen. But 75% of it should have been. And there's so much, as make a comment, so much in this world that's classified, no need to be. Some of it I think is classified because it's easy, much easier to put the classified stamp on it than it is to worry about it. And then nobody sees it, you put it away. Sometimes there are people who something's embarrassing in there, it's classified, and nobody sees it. But for whatever reason, all this information gets classified. And it really shouldn't be. We've got a big job to do in this area. That there are more terrorism threats now, not less. Al-Qaeda has morphed into a number of different organizations. It's not just one. Bin Laden, best information I have, knows very little about what's going on in Al-Qaeda right now. He's hiding away in some cave, you know, because the drones are coming overhead and they didn't want to get hit. So I don't think he's in contact with much of Al-Qaeda. But Al-Qaeda has morphed into these organizations in places like Yemen, in places like Somalia, in places like the jungles of the Philippines, a number of places. And they're sort of operating independently with a very loose connection to Al-Qaeda. And so they're not going to be the centralized Al-Qaeda trying to do a great big attack like 9/11 necessarily. They're going to let loose these people like the shoe bomber or the underpants bomber or whatever. And we're going to have to be aware of these people coming from different parts of the world. They're trying their best to recruit people with blue eyes and blonde hair. That's in one of their training manuals now. You know, we got to recruit people who don't look like they expect people to look. We don't have any record of anybody like that coming up and trying to do it, but they're looking for them. They're trying to find people like that. And there's something else happening now that is very, very worrisome. I remember I was asked to go over and talk to the European Union about terrorism shortly after our report came out. And they said, you know, we've got a much worse problem than you have. Because in Europe, there are all these disaffected people. You know, Europeans have been very ethnocentric is a word or whatever. You know, if you weren't French, you have difficulty sometimes getting a good job in France. If you weren't Italian, you know, you were sort of discriminated against in one way or another. And that's the way a lot of the world, but in Europe. And they told me that they were worried now about these disaffected lone wolf terrorists, they call them. Because they said, you are so lucky in the United States because you've assimilated people so well. You've assimilated people all over the world, so you don't have these disaffected people. Well, for the first time now, we have some warnings. There are people from this country. We had you may have read in the paper about the people who went over to Pakistan to try and join the jihad for American citizens, 4 or 5 young men. And there have been a couple of other examples recently of American citizens who, and that's very, very dangerous because our defenses are pretty darn good now at stopping somebody who comes from particularly a dangerous part of the world. But our defenses aren't very good here against our own citizens. So that's a great worry. And one of the things I think, I've got a new group, Lee and Hamilton and I have formed now to sort of work on some of these problems. The first thing we're going to work on is this situation of homegrown terrorism, to find out how real it is, how worrisome, and then make some recommendations of what we should be doing about it. But they're still out there. You know, they still want to get us. They're still very angry people. And we've got them on a run in some places, but they're still there. And we've got to keep our defenses up. Most of us are pessimists. Most of us say we can stop 30 of these attacks, but maybe the 31st we won't. But we've got to try and stop every one because of the dangers involved to people. We've got to have the very best working together. Of all our recommendations, I'll finish here and then take questions on this subject or any other question. Of all our recommendations, there's only one recommendation or series of recommendations that nobody has done anything about at all. You know, the whole Congress ran supporting our recommendations. Nobody ran, to the best of my knowledge, in any congressional district. We were very popular, so we're all for the 9/11 recommendations. Every presidential candidate ran supporting 9/11 recommendations. But the congressman, Congress was very good in reforming the federal government, except reforming Congress. That is the only area where they've done absolutely nothing. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important for two reasons. The most important one is that, look, I talked about the secrets. If you want to find out about what's going on in transportation, or education, or the environment, you go there, you sit on that congressional committee, you can hear what they say, you can tell your local congressman what you think about it, you can influence policy. It's the way democracy works. And enough people get excited, things change. Intelligence, you can't do that because it's secret. And so, if the intelligence agencies are not working well, there's only one group who can do anything about it, and it's the Congress. So if the congressional oversight is not working properly, there is no oversight whatsoever. And we found that before 9/11. The members of the committee in both parties, the word they used is dysfunction. Our oversight is dysfunctional. Now, why is it dysfunctional? Because if you've ever been in government, some of you have been, I think, at some point or at some level, you find people respond to the financial side of government. People respond to who's got the budget. If I want to influence even the state, I want to get some legislator to help me. If that legislator's got control of the agency of the budget, that agency's going to respond like this, much better than somebody who doesn't have any budget responsibility. Well, the intelligence committees, the Congress, have absolutely no budget responsibility. So the intelligence agencies, they're not paying attention to them, and they don't. Senator Rockefeller, who was chairman of that committee, said, I think we're wasting our time. We ask them questions, they don't answer them, because we have no budget responsibility. And so we recommended, look, the budget responsibility now goes to armed services. Armed services has got the whole budget of the United States Armed Forces. That's what they worry about. They worry about all the bases and the various districts and all that. That's what they worry about. And the intelligence, such a small amount, we don't pay any attention to it. I remember saying this, and one of the chairmen of the committee jumped up and said, no, we give it plenty of attention. Isn't that right? Isn't there any member of the committee here? John McCain, who's a truth teller, he jumps up, looks at the chairman and says, John, you know how much time we spend on it? McCain says, yeah, maybe 2 minutes, if that. And nobody argued with him. So there isn't oversight in that area. The second area is just what I call conflicting jurisdictions. I've known pretty well now every Secretary of Homeland Security since the very first one, since the department was created. And Janet Napolitano, who's the present secretary, said the same thing to me, her two predecessors had said. Is there anything you can do about the Congress? And I know exactly what she was going to say because I'd heard it from her two predecessors. She said, look, I report to 85 different congressional committees and subcommittees. And they all want me to testify on my top deputies. We spend 1/3 of our time either testifying before Congress or preparing testimony before the Congress, when we should be out defending the American people. Can't you do anything to get Congress to do the same things they do in a number of other areas and have maybe 2 committees in the House, 2 committees in the Senate of jurisdiction so that we testify before those bodies, but not 85 committees? And Congress, we said that in our report. Every Secretary of Homeland Security have said they have the same problem at both administrations. And Congress has done nothing whatsoever about it. So Homeland Security is distracted by all these various jurisdictions. It spills over a bit to the other departments too, because the fellow who's head of the County Terrorism Center, who by the way is from New Jersey, Mr. Leiter, he said that he's since this incident, that he's testified before 35 committees. And he says, I should be really trying to make this center work, finding out what went wrong, correcting it, and everything else. I'm in Congress every day. And any of you who've ever testified before Congress, it's hard work. You've got to prepare the testimony, and you've got to be there, and you've got to answer questions. I finally walked out on a committee the other day because I had to catch a train back to New Jersey, but you testify, and then if the committee all comes, and they do if they're interested, they each get 10 or 15 minutes to question you. If there are 14 or 15 members of the committee, add it up. That's a hell of a lot of time. So anyway, I'll just say that finally. This is the only one of our recommendations. Every one of our other recommendations is at least partially or to some degree fulfilled. Congress has done nothing. And if they do nothing, it's going to hurt us and hurt our security, because somebody has got to be responsible for these intelligence agencies and making sure they're working. We created a whole new system, national intelligence, counterterrorism. All that's new. Is it working? How well is it working? It's Congress's responsibility. If they're not doing it, we haven't got an answer to that question. We need an answer. So anyway, I've been rambling on for probably long enough, but I wanted to give you some of that background and then really answer questions, because there's a lot more going on, not only in this area but in a lot of areas, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that anybody has.
questions in a second, but I just wanted you to know that the governor has been kind enough to agree to sign copies of the 9/11 Commission report that we have for sale, as well as his fabulous book, Without Precedent, that he wrote with Representative Hamilton, as well as there's a biography of the governor in the back also. And now, I believe that you had your hand up first, so.
First, I want to thank you so much for all the work you did on the commission. I'm a family member who fought for that commission, and I'm so grateful.
God bless you. Let me say this before you say anything else. I should have said more about the families. Because without them, first of all, the commission wouldn't have been appointed. Congress didn't want it. The family members came and lobbied and made Congress support. Every time we ran into a problem, they didn't want to give us enough money. They didn't want to give us enough time. Every time we ran into those obstacles, the families, frankly, would charge Washington. And these people are extraordinary. These are people who've never had any relationship with Washington before in their lives. They learned how to sit outside a congressman's office till he came out. They learned how to picket the White House. They learned how to do whatever was necessary. And I called them one point the wind in our sails. And they're the most remarkable people. And the head of the families of 9/11 was right there when I testified 2 days ago. They still haven't given up. They're still there, and they still have not only their welfare of the other families at heart, but they also are absolutely determined that they're going to do everything in their power to make sure this never happens to other families. So they're an extraordinary group, and I welcome you, and I should have said that earlier.
My question is, recently I've heard Dan Rather say that there are 100 al-Qaeda left in Afghanistan. Now, there are two questions. One is, 100 doesn't sound like a lot for us to be waging war there rather than support there. And two, the concern to me is more the recruitment and training than, I'm not concerned about future attacks, but recruitment and training is a big issue. Whether it's in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that seems to be happening. And more, like you said, blonde hair, blue eyed, it doesn't matter.
That's you're absolutely right. And what we say in the report, which you cannot allow Al-Qaeda to have a safe place to recruit and to train. If they hadn't been able to recruit and train that whole operation in Afghanistan, that's how 9/11 occurred. It took 5 years for them to pull off 9/11. And so we can't give them a safe haven. Now, I don't know how Dan Rather is counting Al-Qaeda numbers in Afghanistan, but I think there's no question that most people do believe that there are more probably in that border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and it's very difficult, as you know, mountainous border, and it's very hard to tell who's on what side sometimes. And we think, we don't know, we think bin Laden's there, we don't know that. And so this administration, from the campaign on, has said this is, the Iraq war was the wrong war, this is the right war, this is where the enemy is, and we're going to try and do it right. Personally, I worry about it, and I'll tell you why. I frankly was not a supporter of the Iraq war either, but I'll tell you what I worry about Afghanistan. I'm a historian by training, I used to teach it. I know the history of Afghanistan. You know, starting with Alexander the Great, no standing army has ever been successful in Afghanistan. It's composed, it's never been a real country, it's composed of these tribal warlords, in a sense, who run different parts of the country. The only time they get together is when they've got a foreign army in their soil, and then their tribes all seem to come together and fight whoever that foreign army happens to be. And it's happened to the British, it happened to the Russians recently, it happened to whoever. And the people who have been successful in Afghanistan, and very few have been, have done it a different way. Do you remember when we went into Afghanistan right after 9/11? We didn't go in with a big army. We went in with some highly trained Navy SEALs and some CIA people, and we worked with the Northern Alliance, so-called, one of the tribes up in the north. We worked with some other factions, frankly used the American dollar to try and get some help from some of the tribes, and we had the Taliban on the run in about 2 weeks. That, to me, was a more successful strategy. I think standing army in Afghanistan worries me. mean, I hope we all hope we're successful. But I wonder whether using highly trained people, using Afghans, working with the tribes, and trying to get them to claim, because they don't want, I mean, not that you can poll Afghanistan too well, but every time we try to do it, it says they don't like the Taliban. They don't like us much either, especially when we come with helmets and boots. And I have a feeling, I mean, I just have a worry that we may be going at it the wrong way.
Just to follow to that, what I'd like to ask is, did you make any suggestions, do you have any suggestions for what direction or recommendations should be made for this particular issue?
For the war? Or for the intelligence?
For the training?
Yeah, we testified, Lee and I have both testified twice in the last 10 days or so, and we really recommend is, first of all, giving the so-called Director of National Intelligence the kind of authority he needs, because there have been some factions within the intelligence community, and they've been fighting this way, fighting that way, talking to members of Congress they know, and we don't need that kind of factionalism within the intelligence community. And we think the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, is structured to be the boss, and he ought to be the boss. And he ought to be able to put things together. Secondly, when the Congress put through the bill reorganizing intelligence, the Congress weakened it a bit because they were worried that the DNI would be control of military intelligence. The Armed Services Committee didn't want them to do that, and so it weakened the bill a bit. So it's not as powerful as we wanted it. But we said at the time, Lee Hamilton particularly said at the time, I don't worry about that because the President can do that. The President can really ensure that the DNI is the boss. And as long as the President's supportive, I don't worry about it. Well, the President's got to do that. I mean, the President has got to be the leader, and the President's got to be the boss. The President's got to outline who's in charge. There's got to be somebody in charge. It's not the DNI that makes somebody else in charge. I know he does it in the war, but somebody's got to be in charge. And you can't have the kind of factionalism, because that was our first recommendation, that they get the DNI straight. Second was what I mentioned about analysts, that they have to be given more responsibilities, more recognition for what they do. And then we had some recommendations as far as the whole airport thing. Our system was never designed to have those people with the machines being the real line of defense. It's not supposed to work that way. We have got these lists, and supposedly we should be able to stop the bad guys from getting on the plane to begin with. And we've got a wonderful system in Washington. I'll tell you, you'd be, I'm not telling any secrets, I don't think, to say there's a room in Washington, big room, and you go in it, and on these screens all over the room, they can see passengers of every single plane coming into the United States that day from anywhere in the world. And if any names are suspicious, they're supposed to be pulled out and looked at and questioned and made sure that they're not somebody who's coming to do us harm. That's the way the system's supposed to work, and that's what failed. So we talked about some improvements to that system, because I don't think the TSA ever should be our first line of defense. I mean, I think it's a great argument whether we should have these machines showing us without underwear or whatever. But I think it's, and I don't think that's our first line of defense. That's maybe additional, and that may be fine. But it's not important.
Thank you, sir.
Governor, it's always a thrill to see you. My focus has been on the fact that we have open borders in this country, and it has to stop. And what really concerns me, and I had the great pleasure of sitting with America's mayor and having the chance to really discuss this. The fact of the matter is that this country really needs to get more militant. If you read the 9/11 report, you want to get sick to your stomach, because there are so many political overrides here that gave you the authority to do your job, but didn't give you the authority to do your job. And that became a trickle-down theory. And what you have here now is you have, to some degree, an ignorant public, which really scares me. You mentioned blonde hair, blue eye. I can guarantee you that at least 20% of the people here don't know that's Iranian. That's a fact.
That can be Iranian.
And I can say with a lot of fear that these people will pass through. They will pass through. And, you know, there are so many overtones about civil rights, and certainly I believe in that, don't misunderstand. But I want my kid to be alive. And you know what? Profile me. By all means, search me, do it. I don't care. Because I know that when my husband traveled from Pakistan to Turkey, they didn't just pat him down, they took his clothes off, but he came home safe to me. You ever do that in this country, I don't even want to tell you what would happen, and I think you know it. But yet, the Congress doesn't want to hear this. And if you say that you're very unpopular and you're labeled, we should have a national ID badge. We should. The Europeans carry it. Why don't we? And why is it that we can't get a president, and it could be Clinton, Bush, Reagan, Obama, any of them. Nobody wants to get up there and say to Congress, behave yourselves, grow up, act like good boys and girls. Do one thing, secure the nation. We'll fight about Social Security, we'll fight about, because if we have another 9/11, does healthcare really matter? I mean, and I'm not saying that it doesn't, please don't downplay that, but.
Yeah, it's, you know, I get your frustration, I share some of it. As I say, I think the system we have for stopping people getting airplanes, if it's properly administered, if the technology is the top, and the rest people are working on it, that's pretty good. I do worry about the borders. You're absolutely right. Particularly the Canadian border, finally. There are 30 different or 40 different forms of identification now. If you want to cross the Canadian border, you can use any of them. Now, that's not a secure system. And because people didn't want a national ID card, we said, all right, then we've got to mandate the states. And New Jersey, I think, has done it already. Take out your New Jersey license, you know, now it's a polygraph kind of thing. It's very hard to duplicate. But a number of states haven't done that. And what we said, at least force the states to do that. But then the states rebelled, particularly the ones along the border. Because they said, look, people go back and forth.
Florida in particular,
5 or 6,
you can renew your license online, they don't even take it.
Yeah, 5 or 6 times, and you know, nobody checks. And it's very worrisome. I think we've got to, we said that also in our report. You've got to move to some sort of a system with verifiable identification, so that when you cross the border, we know who you are. And it's not there yet. But the problem has been the opposition of the border states. A lot of the border states have very important congressmen representing important districts, and they've so far stopped any kind of there have been bills to do just what you say. But so far they've been stopped in Congress. It's worrisome. And, you know, I'll tell you, by the way, this happened last year. I was going, I guess, down to Washington, went from Newark Airport, and I was one of the ones selected. And they pulled me out of line. You know, I got the whole pat-down treatment and the this and the that, and the luggage went through my hand and everything else, and finally the guy started chuckling. I looked at him, you know, you don't see those guys laugh right at me. And he said, go down to Washington and tell your friends we're doing our job.
There's a young lady in the back.
Thank you very much for coming to speak today, Governor Kean. I'm just wondering what your opinion, and knowing everything that you know and studying what you studied, what your opinion is on the decision to try some of the 9/11 terrorists in our city.
I am having studied Khalid Sheikh Mohammed very hard, because he was the one actually who planned the whole 9/11 attack. I am very against trying him in New York City. And one of the main reasons is that's what he wants. He wants to be a martyr, and he wants to talk to the world first, and he would like to do it in the World Trade Center, and he sort of said that. And now this is a very, very bad guy. This is not only the guy who planned the 9/11 attack. This is a guy who, when he's in the Philippines, had something called the Bojinka plot, which was going to blow up 5 different airlines traveling between the West Coast and Japan and China. This is the guy who had a plan to blow up the Pope. This is the guy who tried to one point had a plan to blow up Bill Clinton when he was president. This is a very, very bad human being. This is the uncle of the guy who blew up the World Trade Center the first time. So he's a really bad apple. And to give him what he wants in sort of a show trial to show that American democracy works, if we want to put him on trial, fine, let's do it in Las Vegas, or let's do it somewhere. well away from the city and well away from the families. For us to spend, what are they saying it's going to cost now? Some huge amount of money to go. And depending on what the lawyers do, the trial could last a year or two, and give him all this publicity to be able to talk to the world and say, I'm only this because the United States shouldn't be doing this, or it shouldn't be helping Israel, or something, whatever. I don't think we ought to give him that forum and allow him to be a martyr in that way. I don't. And the other thing surprised me. The Attorney General made that decision. Now, the Attorney General did not talk, because it had very heavy national security implications, what he's going to say, what secrets lawyers are going to try to force out, or what have you. He made that decision without consulting the Director of National Intelligence, without consulting the FBI, without consulting the CIA, and I think without consulting the President. That's wrong. Anyway, long answer to your question, all against it.
One man, one vote, that all districts had to be equal. But that was made before the invention of the computer. And when you have the computer, you can make any district you want as long as the numbers are equal. So as Republicans and Democrats got together and say, why should we have problems? Let's make safe districts for all of us. So for instance, in New Jersey, we did have 2 districts that were really swing districts. One was going around Princeton, the other was here in Union County, and so on. The 2 congressmen got together, Congressman Ferguson and Congressman, the guy from Princeton. And they got together one night and said, why should we have tough fights? The Republicans said, I'll give you 2 Democratic towns, I don't want them. And they're all, I'll give you 2 Republican towns, I don't want them. But guess what? We've got no more swing districts in the state. Most districts are now pretty solidly, and that happened all over the country. So we have this incumbency protection, which there are only about 80 districts maybe in the whole country that have any possibility of swing now, maybe less. And all the rest have been gerrymandered into safe districts for Republicans or Democrats, both. That's one thing. Secondly, and this is exacerbated by this recent court decision, I think money is the cancer on politics right now. I mean, people just, the amount of money people spend for office. I mean, New Jersey, this is not a Republican comment, but I was very glad to see somebody who's outspent 4-1 win. That's very unusual. And it sends a sign you can't always do it through money. But mostly you can. And generally the guy who has 2 or 3 times as much money as the other person wins. So what happens? First of all, the congressmen have to start raising money the day they get down to Washington. They start holding fundraisers right away so they can build up this war chest so that if you're an incumbent congressman, you can run for re-election, you've got $3 million in the bank, and one of you may want to run for the district, but you look up and say, he's got $3 million. How long does it take me to raise $3 million? And I've got to raise it in small amounts because that's the law. And so you don't run. And that's another thing that keeps them all in office forever. These Senate seats that they charge $10, $12 million now in small states to run, people can't overcome that. It's not a fair election. And the Supreme Court decision is going to make it worse. But, I don't blame this court as much because it's based, I don't know how many, I'm not a lawyer, but some of you may be lawyers. But courts base decisions on precedent. And there was something called the Buckley decision. It was Bill Buckley's brother Jim brought the case and said those days you had a certain amount you could spend for congressional elections and no more. So everybody had sort of an equal playing field. He said that's unconstitutional. It was years ago, since the 70s, I guess, in a 5-4 decision called the Buckley decision, the court ruled that speech is equivalent to money. And if you're limiting money, you can't spend your money, it's limiting your speech. Now, I think Thomas Jefferson must have been rotating in his grave when he made that decision. I mean, to me, it's absurd. But this latest decision was based on that earlier decision. So if you believe free speech is money, then you should be able to spend as much money as you want. That's what this court basically said. You're right to spend as much money as you want, which means every big corporation, every labor union, everybody's going to be sort of unlimited, and it's going to be even worse. But anyway, come back to your question. I am for term limits now, unless we get some form of meaningful campaign finance reform. Because it's not fair otherwise. It's just not fair for people who may want to run for office. We're not going to get good young men and women in this country to run for office against those odds. And it just perpetuates the people in office forever. And that's not what the founders decided. And by the way, you know that gerrymandering business I was talking about in the States? The founders, as you remember with the Constitution, set up the system very carefully. The House is going to be a vote. The House should respond to the people. The House, when there's any kind of a strong passion, people ought to be heard in the House. The Senate's 6-year terms, that should be longer, that's steadier. We want to put a brake on the House because we don't want popular sentiment to override everything. That's the way it was set up. Because of gerrymandering, the House is now the most stable part of the whole system, because it never changes. The Senate is the only volatile thing because they can't redistrict that because it's by state. So it's the opposite of what the founders intended.
Thank you. Just if we could ask a state question first. You see like a lot of towns, like when you're in, they're wrestling with their budgets, property taxes. They don't know if they can, towns like maybe share service consolidate. I mean, will the answer to this property tax problem in the state come from Trenton, or will it have to come from local towns deciding to consolidate, merge services, abolish different things?
I think a lot of the answers, and I hate to say it, a lot of the answers are going to come from localities, I think, because, and I'll tell you why, because the state is run out of money. And it's serious. Nobody knows how, not just in New Jersey, it's around the country. I mean, we're bad off, but maybe California may be worse than New York. I mean, but this is a problem all over the country. And we papered it over for a long time in New Jersey. We had a whole series of governors of both parties who sort of said, we can get by borrowing a little more, we can get by not paying the pension obligation, we can get by not doing this and not doing that. And they phonied up budgets, frankly, in both parties, until we could reach the point where you can't do it anymore. It's the same thing if you did it in your household. You can, if you really want to be irresponsible, you can get through for a while. You can borrow and borrow and borrow. And the interest rate gets higher and higher and higher, but you can borrow and borrow and borrow until eventually you can't do it anymore. Well, it's this point we've reached right now. You can't do it anymore. So here is a governor now, newly elected, who's got a budget that's around $30 billion and a deficit of $10 billion. And a lot of the expenses are mandated. I mean, you've got to pay interest on the debt, for instance. You can't not pay interest on the debt. There's a bunch of those things which are mandated by law. So only about, some Tom will give you an exact figure, but something like only a third of the budget is things that the governor can fool around with. So he's reached the point, or the state has reached the point over the years, and most states are in this point now, unless the economy does a miraculous recovery, which changes everything. They're at the point in the states now where they have to constitutionally have a balanced budget, and they've got no wiggle room. They can't borrow anymore because we're almost junk now on our bond rating because we borrowed so much. Even withholding pension obligations for a while longer didn't really solve the problem. It's just so I would love to say the state's going to come in with some great. I don't know what it could be at this point, because if the state had some wiggle room, if the state still, we have, and you know this better than anybody else, put all the taxes together, we're the highest tax state in the country now. And if you start raising income tax rates, raising sales tax or something like that, you're going to drive people out of this state. People are very mobile around here. And they'll go where they can make money. If you're a business, you make money. You can go where you can prosper. Right now, a lot of the highest income people in the state have already left. And they're the ones who used to pay a lot of the taxes. Anyway, I don't think it's a long answer to a question, but I don't think the states, I'd love to say I see a solution here in the state. But without a major economic recovery, even if we do things to make this state the most business-friendly state in the country, and not that certainly now, it's still going to take years to put that into place and get it working and get people to start moving back in. So in the immediate future, I don't see anything. I think we're going to be shocked by the kind of things the state is forced to do and the kind of programs that we've been accustomed to for years and need, that we're not going to be able to fund anymore.
I was hoping to have an upbeat question to that. Most of, I really personally tremendously applaud your bipartisan approach of your commission and your remarks. And I personally feel that's what we desperately need in this country, or more people are willing to look at things that way. Kind of in that spirit, we here at Maplewood nowadays are predominantly Democrats, and we have a new governor, and I'm hoping that you could say a few words, optimistic words, about what we might expect from the governor to make us all feel good about it, even though we may or may not have voted for it.
You know, things, by the way, things have changed so much, just in my experience of politics. I mean, my father, some of you may remember, was a congressman who represented this area for 20 years. When he was in Congress, he was a Republican. The chairman of his committee would come over on Sunday afternoons and they'd talk together. What was the best thing for the country to do with the committee, which is Ways and Means, that particular week. And they were great friends. When he ran unsuccessfully for the United States Senate in 1958, 3 Democratic members of the Ways and Means Committee wrote letters of endorsement for him. I tell that now to members of Congress, and they're like, what happened to him? You know, I just can't believe it. I mean, but it was a different era. When I was in the legislature, my best friends, just as many Democrats as Republicans, you know, we'd argue about stuff during the day. We'd go out to dinner at night. You know, and automatic. It wasn't just sometimes out. Every night after session, we'd have dinner together. And we'd talk about, we knew our families, went to our families' weddings and funerals and christenings and everything else. And we became very good friends. And right now, from those days in the legislature, I've got just as many close friends in the Democratic Party as I do in the Republican Party. And we get together. And it's just the most bitterly divided legislature I've ever in, which was the one that passed the income tax for the first time. Bitter time. Every 2 years we get together. Those who voted for it, and those who voted against it. And we have dinner, and we told war stories, and we talk about old times, and how good friends we were, in spite of our divisions on that tough issue. So, I mean, that's how things have changed. And now, if somebody crosses the aisle, somebody runs a primary against them. I mean, John McCain, of all people, has a primary this year, because his primary opponent says he's been talking to the Democrats. What a terrible sin. And so it's awful, and we've got, you're absolutely right, we've got to do something about it. Chris Christie, I don't know if you know the story. When I was representing Maplewood here in the Assembly, I lived in Livingston. And I spoke at Livingston High School, as I used to every 2 or 3 years. I spoke here at school here a number of times. And evidently, there was a kid there who really liked what I had to say and went home and told his mother, I think I want to get into politics. He was 14 years old. And his mother said, basically, you're nuts, and let it go. But 3 or 4 days later, he's still talking and getting into politics. So he said, well, this guy Kean. And so his mother said, get in the car. And so she put him in the car, drove him up to my front door. Said, get out. If you want to get into politics, go ask him to get into politics, because I have no idea how to get in. You can ask him how to get into politics. He's the guy who started all this. So this timid knock on the door, and it's young Chris Christie. And he says, sir, I heard you speak when I was in the car, and I think I'd like to know how to get into politics. And I said to him, I'm thinking of running for governor. I'm testing the waters. I'm going up to Bergen, Canada to give a speech tonight. Why don't you get in the car and come with me and see how you like it? And I've known him ever since. But I'll tell you, he's got a very innate sense of what's right or wrong. He doesn't suffer fools gladly, which is going to give him some problems in the legislature. He has got a temper. He's got to keep it under control. He's enormously bright. He's used to doing everything himself, so we've got to learn how to work with a staff, because he's very much up front. And for instance, he did every speech in the campaign himself, including his victory speech election night. There was no speechwriter, there was nothing. And he had a big fight, because he wanted to give the state of the state the same way. And his staff said, now you're governor, you can't do that, because what you say, most of what he said was off the cuff. I said, you just can't do off the cuff stuff, because every word you say as governor, you know, you help to. So they finally got him to, with help, to write out the speech. But so he's used to doing things for himself. I think he's dead honest. I think he's got the right instincts. I think he's told me, and I believe him, he doesn't care if he's a one-term governor, he's going to do the right thing. He knows how deep the problem is. He's mad as hell at former governors and legislators who got us into this mess. And he says, I'm going to do my very best to get this state out. And if I leave after one term and I've done the right thing, that's going to be just fine. So I think he's, I think he's a good guy. And I think he's going to try to do the good thing. He wants to work very much with the legislature, the Democrats in the legislature. So far, so good. It was a wonderful gesture. I don't know if you saw his inaugural speech. But in the middle of the speech, he said, and basically we pledged to work together, and he called the leader of the Senate, Democrat, leader of the Assembly, Democrat, put his arms around him and said, the three of us are going to work together to make this state a better place. And they all nodded and they all shook. And I think they meant it. So I've talked to Steve Sweeney, who I know somewhat, who's the new Senate president. He says, we're going to butt heads on some things, but I like the guy, and I think we can work together.
Well, this will be the last question.
From New York Times Local. You and the other governors recently had lunch together, and I'm wondering what kind of advice you gave to one of them.
Well, if I told you what advice we gave, he would never have lunch with us again. But I basically give him some advice how I worked with. I had a Democratic Senate for 8 years. We worked very well together, and we took, for the good things we did, we took joint credit for. We stood up together and took credit. And when things didn't go well, we stood up there and took some blame together. But we became close friends in the process. We worked together, and I was giving him some idea of how that happened, and how I thought he could start working doing the same thing.